What signs, what warning signs should we be concerned about?
Chronic performance decline. You'll have bad times, but if it's chronic over time and it's got to do with degradation of the social relationships, even performance at school, is what he considered an early warning sign.
The diagnosis is a description, it's not an explanation. We're separating them from their disease or what they might be struggling with. What comes up for you around that?
I want to really disassociate myself from bad diagnosis. And yes, I am a person first, and I have a personality, and there's a lot of aspects to me apart from that.
Hearing somebody out is a very vital role without the advice.
It can just be giving a listening ear. Even that can be of great help, because a lot of the times we just need someone to just listen to us.
I don't always think young people are as impressionable as their parents might think. There's a story behind why they're attracted to the peer group. And there is literature that suggests that a protective measure against kind of addiction and substance use involvement is a healthy outlet, such as sports activity, after school activity.
From a patient perspective, it's hard to say no, but it's okay to express that, but we don't always have to express it in a negative manner.
We can say it with love, or sort of sandwiched between appreciation or acknowledgement. Welcome, everyone. So great to have you here. My name is Susan Raphael, and I'm an internationally certified addiction and mental health clinician. I'm also a referral clinician with the National Basketball Association in their clinicians network. I specialize in addiction and recovery counseling with a focus on teenagers, young adults, and adults and parents as well. I have lived experience. I'm in recovery long-term myself from addiction and mental health issues. And combined with my professional experience, sort of informs me to the work that I do, and I'm very passionate about it. I've recently had a book published called What's Wrong with My Teen? Finding Answers to Teenage Addiction and Family Crisis. And so that's available wherever books are sold. Now I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Isha, who's going to introduce herself.
Thank you, Susan. So my name is Isha, and I'm an early childhood educator. I'm about to graduate from George Brown College with a leadership degree in early childhood, and I have my previous bachelor in fine arts in Indian classical dance. And last year I published a book. It's a memoir called Finding Order and Disorder, which prompted me to also found a NGO recently. And so we do a lot of podcasts and really wanting to open up conversations and do therapeutic dance workshops. And I like to really just advocate, and I have lived experience in being a survivor of gender-based violence as well. So that's basically all about me. And I'm so happy that Susan reached out to invite me for this conversation, and I'm looking forward to this. So thank you.
Thank you, Isha. That's great. And I want to shout out to John Swain and to George, who were instrumental in kind of prompting me to get this video going. So thanks to you guys. And they do amazing work with Stella's Place, located in Toronto, that supports young people and adults with mental health conditions or, symptoms, behaviors that they wish to get some support around. So that's in Toronto. It's a great organization. And thanks for all your support, John and George. So the key themes today are signs, what warning signs should we be concerned about? And I do like to talk about symptoms and behaviors. That way, we're not talking about diagnoses, we're not labeling, we're not kind of, we're separating the individual, the person, the teen, or the parent for that matter, because they could have a condition as well, we're separating them from their disease or what they might be struggling with. So, do you want to do you want to speak to that, Isha? What comes up for you around that?
Yeah, that's a really good point. Thank you for that, Susan. So essentially, when I was diagnosed back in when I was 16, it was always that I would associate myself with that label of my mental health condition or diagnosis. So I was diagnosed with bipolar disorder, and that's also I felt that there was a lot of self-stigma attached with it. But for me, I think the stepping stone to kind of get past that was when I really told myself that I want to really disassociate myself from that diagnosis. And yes, I am a person first, and I have a personality, and there's a lot of aspects to me apart from that. And I don't necessarily have to explain all my behaviors in association with that diagnosis. Yes, some of my behaviors may be because of it. I mean, in terms of uh, phases or episodes which I may have experienced, but it is very important to separate yourself from that because it can really pull you down. And I think as patients, caregivers, we want to rise above that. So.
Yeah, absolutely. And I had a thought there. What was it a difficult process for you to receive a diagnosis, like a clinical appropriate diagnosis? Because I know that's something that my clients talk about a lot, that it's very difficult there. And often caregivers and parents are looking for the diagnosis, thinking sometimes that that's going to be some panacea and all of the answers will be solved if they just know what this is, right?
Yeah, so initially in my case, they were predicting schizoaffective disorder, and later through a family doctor, we found out that it was that it was bipolar, and it did take quite a few months to arrive at that conclusion. It was, I think, about 6 months that I was actually in a youth facility, and this was in Alberta actually. But I always think to myself that maybe the system was trying to kind of, like try out medications on me. But it can be very challenging sometimes to diagnose because there are so many intersecting symptoms of various conditions. But I do feel that having some level of faith in the system is required to navigate. Otherwise, you can really find it challenging, both as a patient and caregiver.
Absolutely. That's an excellent point. Advocating for oneself and parents and caregivers advocating for their loved one. And that could be very tenuous because the loved one, the teenager, the young adult, the subject that we're talking about this evening is not always willing to have their caregiver involved. And that brings up confidentiality, how much wants to be shared. But I do believe that there can be that relationship, that partnership between parent and caregiver, young person, and the system that they're entering, whatever health provider, that there can be communication and sort of a partnering of or strategic alliances, we might say, if there were two businesses working together, where there's autonomy respected for each, yet there's a willingness to assist and support with a goal of kind of well-being being the goal for really everyone. And I would always encourage, and I always encourage parents and caregivers to do their own searching and advocating for their own resources. So, parent groups, organizations, there's wonderful organizations out there today. It may seem like it's such a difficult system to navigate, and it is. I find it incredibly difficult to navigate as a professional. And there are services there. So I often say just keep knocking on those doors because somebody will answer, somebody will have a solution. and you're kind of scaffolding your way towards solutions in the mental health and addiction system. There are lots of different services. Okay, there's not the perfect wraparound match for everyone, but there are services out there, and find someone who can help you navigate them. Find, supports and advocacy, and it is out there. Um, okay, so the thing too about teenagers, science is telling us more and more that the brain is developing until about the mid 20s. Some are saying even a little bit later. So when we have substances involved, and when we have concurrent disorders, so other things, other diagnoses, other conditions, some diagnosed, maybe some not. There's a lot going on in the teenager. So you have the onset of this developmental phase that is somewhat described in the literature, sometimes erratic behavior, sometimes impulsivity, all traces back to the brain not being fully developed and being in development. So, how do you tell what's going on when you have all of these other developmental issues going on? I don't know if you want to speak to that or.
Yeah, so for me, the real discovery took place when I was doing my early childhood program. That's when the real emphasis was to kind of explore and make meaning of my early childhood years. And I would really, and research says the same, that 0 to 6, the years between 0 to 6 are so critical. And when we also look at adverse childhood experiences, I always thought to myself, oh, I didn't, firstly, I didn't know that term until I did the course. And then when I did the course, I said, oh, I have this, I experienced this, and this. And so everything started to make sense of why possibly the bipolar gene that I had in me manifested in the way it did. And I think that was a big breakthrough for me, because I feel that everything really just boils down to the childhood, and then it kind of how it kind of unfolds into the life course trajectory is very. I mean, you look at that pathway, right? Like how a life unfolds, but really when we reflect upon it, for me, what has really been a strong support system is having strong connections within family and friends. And for some, it's not always family, and for some, it's not always friend, but then it could be community in any form, you know? But
Absolutely,
I
yeah.
feel that we're social beings and we need those that community engagement and connection. So that really worked for me. Yeah.
Susan, I can make a comment if this is a good time.
Go ahead, John.
Yeah, so again, the context for my comment is that my wife and I are parents to was now a 41-year-old, but back in the teenage years, because that's the topic we're talking about. Um, the yes, there were a lot of things going on with him and so he's getting kicked out of classes and all sorts of things like that, and getting in trouble with the law. All of them. That doesn't presuppose anything, but when we have talked to his psychiatrist, who he has seen for several years now, and he's an adolescent and an adult psychiatrist, and I remember asking him what he starts looking for, and what he said is really interesting. He said chronic performance decline. In other words, yes, you'll have bad times, your bad school year, but if it's chronic over time, and it's got to do with degradation of the social relationships, even performance at school, or some of the things they used to do and they're not doing anymore, over time is what he considered an early warning sign, not a diagnosis, but an early warning sign to sort of take a look at that and actually dig into it in terms of more diagnostic science. So I just thought I'd offer that, and certainly in reflecting on our son, who he's still managing his mental health cocktail of mental health disorders. That certainly was the case, and even when he was at university in the 20s, you could see year to year his marks dropping, and that wasn't normal for him.
Mhm.
because of his intelligence level. So it knew we were on to something that was more pervasive than just, a bad spot in his life or that. So I just thought I'd offer that as insights I have reflecting back now
Yeah.
on our son's journey.
Yeah, that's a key term, the chronic performance decline. And I would also say, and I do have in my book lists of kind of the physical, the emotional symptoms that one might see, kind of what's the um, normal. We don't like to, talk about normal, abnormal, but what's within the developmental trajectory, that list, and then what's in kind of the warning signs. And always a sudden change or a dramatic shift is often a pretty good indicator. I had the pleasure of seeing Gabor Mate last week in Toronto, and he said, I think it took me several pages to describe this in my book, but he said a diagnosis is a description. It's not an explanation. So I always ask the people, the caregivers and parents I'm working with, and I ask the youth if it doesn't come out naturally, what's the story behind what the behaviors and symptoms are telling us? And that's not necessarily something for the parent or caregiver to delve into, but it is something to be curious about. If the behavior and symptoms had words, what would they be saying? And that maybe is a good segue, Isha, to suppression versus expression. So, for example, when I was a teen, had a lot of symptoms and behaviors going on. I was really good at masking them. So there was a lot of suppression going on. There was very little expression, and there was a lot of suppression. And it was not a healthy coping strategy, yet it was my coping strategy. So, Isha, do you want to speak to the suppression versus expression?
Yes. So I feel even for me, it's a very critical part of any family relations and family dynamics where you feel like you're in a safe space to express yourself and really be your authentic self. Because a lot of the times we fake emotion, we have this sort of superficial niceness where we want to portray a certain kind of emotion and behavior, and we're afraid to really be a certain way because we're afraid that the society or the family or friends will judge us for it. And I think once we get to the point where we can do that without that fear of being judged for something, I think that is the first step. Because, for example, if someone does not express themselves the way they really want to, then there really is no way of really seeing what that person is going through, or maybe if not through behavior, just through conversation, like striking those conversations. And it doesn't always have to be about, especially for caregivers. I mean, from my point of view, at least, I'm not a parent, but I have a parent. So that point of view, it doesn't have to necessarily be about like giving advice, but it can just be giving a listening ear, just hearing someone out. And even that can be of great help, because a lot of the times we just need someone to just listen to us.
Absolutely. I talk about how listen and silent are spelled with the same letters. And parents and caregivers do, in my experience, and I do too, as a caring loved one, I suppose, like to solution for others and like to problem solve. And young people really want to be on their own path with their own autonomy, with parents and caregivers there to support, yet not advise, unless asked. So that's really key. So you can always check in with your teen and say, do you want, how can I be helpful here? Do you want just to me to be a sounding board? Do you want advice? Do you want me to just listen? Do you want me feedback? Can I give you some feedback? And they, to offer them some opportunity to express themselves and what they might need. And then it forces them to think about, what do I need in this situation? But if we just jump in, as we tend to do, I mean, we get excited about trying to help, or maybe that they've spoken to us and they haven't spoken to us in days as a teen. They've come out of their room and they're talking, and you just want to engage so quickly that you can jump in. It's really difficult, but I always advise to just take a step back. And my slogan is keep my mouth shut. So KMS, keep mouth shut. I can always ask something later. And if I do jump in, I can, apologize, step back. What do you need here? How can I be helpful? And the other piece that was coming to mind when you were talking, Isha, is that that's what we're doing tonight. We're building awareness. We're talking about difficult subjects. We're talking about things that can cause discomfort. And we're, you know, removing the stigma and the barriers around doing so. And the more labels we have, the more language we have around what we're experiencing, the more sense of identification we can have with a solution or the outcome or a plan. That if we're holding it all inside and we're only in our own head with things, the awareness is maybe not coming. So hearing somebody out is a very, being that person to hear someone out, it's a very vital role without the advice. Okay, back to sort of suppression versus expression. I often say that boys act out and girls act in. It's quite gender based, but that in my experience, I do tend to see boys being more anger oriented, more outburst oriented, more criminal justice involved. Girls tend to be more of the self-harm, the eating disorder, um, the kind of like relational things going on. Some would say, manipulation, but that's a kind of an adverse term. More of the quiet, sort of silent things. I don't know what you think about that, Isha. I know you don't like to kind of be on the labeling too much, but I'd love your thoughts on that.
Yeah, definitely. I don't know if I would be able to speak to the gender differences, but I could speak to my lived experiences being a woman and a girl. So back then, I really uh, I would want that connection. So I was very social. I was always very social. I was very drawn to dance as a child as well as in my teens. I would do a lot of Latin dance, and I think that's also where I kind of uh, got a bit lucky because I found that activity to kind of, you know, have a hobby and have something to be passionate about, which eventually became a passion. But I think that that passion also boiled down to being with community and going back to what I said earlier about just being around people and connecting on many levels. It could just be listening to music, going for a walk, striking a conversation with strangers. I've done this very often, even if I'm sitting in an airplane and talking to a complete stranger. Often, sometimes you feel comfortable with just sharing when you don't even know the person, right? So, it's where you're afraid of being judged, where the person knows you, especially in family settings. I have experiences. So for me, it always boils down to community. And in terms of how one expresses themselves, I think it's definitely very dependent on factors such as genes, environment, and comfort level between the caregiver and the child and the parents and family dynamics, and whether it's a single parent. Like in my case, it was me and my mom was mostly bringing me up. I was in a boarding school, and so it depends a lot on that, like who are your primary circle and in the systems, in the various systems. And I really like to talk about that because it's like first you have that micro and macro and exo. So all those systems and who plays what role in the system. And at the end of the day, you can choose your systems too. So I think that we really need to also take that agency in deciding and making those boundaries because especially for from a patient or like from that perspective, it is hard to do that. It's hard to say no. It's hard to say sometimes I'm not comfortable with this and I don't feel right with this, but it's okay to express that. But we don't always have to express it in a negative manner. We can say it nicely.
Absolutely. Absolutely. We can say it nicely. We can say it with love, or sort of sandwiched between um, appreciation or acknowledgement. Yeah, so peers are very important to teens. And in my experience, and there's some science to back it up, that if young people don't attach to a primary caregiver, a loved one in their family, they will really attach to their peers more. And and that can be great if your peers are supportive and doing things that are adaptive and healthy. And that can also be a negative if you're attracted to a peer group, or hang out with a peer group that is more into the risk taking or the rule breaking. Um, Parents so often come to me and say, "Well, it's all about the friends. If they weren't hanging out with Fred, Joe, and Bob, they'd be just fine." And I'm never quite so sure about that because they chose Fred, Joe, and Bob. So there's a dynamic there, and I don't always think young people are as impressionable as their parents might think. There's a story behind why they're attracted to the peer group they're attracted to, and there is literature that suggests that. A protective measure against kind of addiction and substance use involvement, at least, is a healthy outlet such as sports activity, after school activity, um, being involved in a community that's like-minded individuals. And so for some, that might be all the kids that are smoking weed or using cannabis. So it is important to be noticing what young people are, as the parent and caregiver, what they're attracted to, and not how you can direct it, but just how you can have these opportunities offered to them. And often people, young people are building community online with video games, and that's a very popular and social media form of connection too. So what are your thoughts on that? I know we did discuss this a little bit as we were prepping for our session today.
So I would not know personally much about the video games, but I do know if you're playing them in a group, that's great. And if you're playing them with people, that's great. But about social media, I can say this, that I definitely relate a lot, and I have related in the past, and a lot of people have, to that fear of missing out, of FOMO, where people are constantly scrolling on Instagram and they're just so obsessed over what the other person is doing with their lives. And everyone just really wants to let other people know that they're having the time of their life. And not everyone might be having it, but it's just this really fake world that we are tending to live in. And it's also about fake news, which is also scary. And it's, of course, we don't want to talk politics here, but I think with everything going on in our planet, there's just so many things to be concerned about what we really intake, and especially as teens, like how teens can we be exposed to things that do not impact us in or trigger us in a certain way. Uh, and I guess as caregivers, how can we prevent that from happening? I mean, you have that internet and you have that social media so readily accessible on a phone. And I think that one way it can be dealt with or tackled. I wouldn't say dealt with, I don't like that word, but having those open conversations at a dining table, or not being afraid to have those conversations, because I think the more again you suppress, it's like what you persist resist, right? So you just don't be like, oh no, 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 no this, no that, no that, because I feel like they'll end up doing that. That's what even kids do. So it's like, yeah.
And I love that you said the dining table, so that presupposes that families are sitting down, maybe not the whole family every night, but sitting down for some meals together. And I think that's really important that there is time to connect one-on-one with your teen, time to connect as a family, have these kinds of talks. Don't expect that you can set a boundary at a certain age if this is the first time that you're bringing a matter up. That's going to be really difficult. So I mean, I feel for parents. I'm not a parent myself. I've had hundreds of children come through my doors, and some are still in my life after a very, very long time. But I kind of consider myself a community mother, community parent. And parents are under immense pressure today, like pressure like never before, I believe, that all of the things they have to be kind of up on. And the social media is one of them, the screen time, uh, addiction. There's gambling addiction I've seen on the rise in my own anecdotal practice of counseling, definitely on the rise. And so having for parents and caregivers to have an understanding of how some of these things work. And there are lots of resources out there. And there's lots of people talking about this and looking for regulation around some of these things. Because just like, when I grew up in at least my early years, seatbelts weren't mandated and people smoked in vehicles still. So we've come a long way with regulations, and the internet is something that may, in some respects, require for children some regulation. So looking into some of these areas so that you can be informed, so you can have a sense of what's going on and be talking. I learned so much from my clients just from listening to them. I've never really been experienced with cannabis, but I learn everything I need to know about cannabis from my clients because I ask them and they're so willing to tell me. And that's how I learn about things that I don't have firsthand experience with. So they're very smart and they're willing to share if they have a safe and trusting adult to share with. And that's not always going to be the parent. So that's where people like me and Isha in early childhood development environments come in useful, because we can be that other person who is advocating and supporting a young person, but not the family.
Oh,
And
yeah, no, I also wanted to sort of circle back to what you were talking about, gambling and all these addictions. I think even lot of literature also supports that is really just a symptom, but the real core issue or problem is somewhere else, and we really need to try to dig deep and analyze and see where that is coming from. For example, with me, I know that my manifestation of the bipolar was really the issues I had with my parents' divorce and my relationship with my father. And that kind of manifested in the relationships I had. And once I made peace with that, the episodes reduced. And so did I got married last year. So it's kind of like, I think it's very related to the core issues on a very conscious or unconscious level that we may not have faced. So I know we were going to also talk about coping mechanism, but then, yeah, so I'll leave you to that. Yeah.
maybe that's getting into coping mechanisms from from my counseling kind of purview. We often talk about a top-down versus a bottom-up approach, and whether we deal with the addiction symptoms and coping directly, or whether we implement, if the client is not willing, we implement some harm reduction strategies, and we work more from a bottom up, which is building the coping skills, building the life, building the connections, building the activities, mastering activities of daily living to kind of scaffold the ability to cope, such that you eventually don't need the substance. So that sometimes with clients, it's you decide which way you're going to go as you're developing a treatment plan. But those are definitely beneficial, and interesting that you noted that when you were under less stress and these other outside factors weren't at play, then you were having less symptoms. And I think that's kind of at the crux of a lot of my approach, is that it's a mind and body approach. It's holistic. It's biological, social, psychological, environmental. All of these factors are at play, as well as the developing teen. So having someone to talk to say, is this normal? Is this going to be a problem? It can be very helpful, and it can reduce the parent's anxiety and stress level such that they can be more present and to their teen, and really have some tools also and their own coping strategy. So around coping, what maybe you could share what have been the most useful coping strategies that you've identified for yourself?
So for me, I had a little section, just like thinking back to it. I had some like rules for life, which I followed personally. So I mean, for me, I don't have late nights anymore, and I've stopped caffeine completely. And if at all, I have maybe just 1 cup in the first half of the day. And I was lucky that I never ever had any drugs, so I didn't have that issue. I never had alcohol before, so I didn't I didn't get tempted because I was diagnosed at 16. I already started meth. I was told if you mix it, it might be an issue. So I just didn't do it. And so I got a bit, yeah. So these were the things that I followed. But in terms of coping mechanisms, I used having a purpose, like a passion. And so for me, that's always been dance. So I did a lot of Latin dance, and I used to even do it when I was in rehab, So I had at that time I had a YouTube channel, and I already had posted a lot of videos. So sometimes I used to just play it, and we would all dance together. We would do yoga. I had a yoga certification, and then finally journaling, because uh, past 8 years, I've actually really been journaling and writing a lot. And finally, now I'm going to be pursuing my master's. And so I really like journaling, and that's kind of translated into research. And so, even with my mother doing her film, that was, of course, that's another thing, but that was a very good opportunity to kind of collaborate with my caregiver, although her thesis was her length, like her viewpoint, and I the memoir is my viewpoint. So I could agree to disagree on a lot of things, but she did require her own catharsis, and that was her catharsis, and I respected that. So I think that parents need to go through that, and whether it's with your child or whether it's with other parents, you need to like talk it out or just process that, because you're in this together. So it's you're also probably gonna have some. I know a lot of parents have a lot of uh, like PTSD when it comes to just dealing with what the child is going through. So it's good to have a community around you, not just only for the child, but also for yourself. So
Oh, that's so well said. Maybe just for the benefit, I know George and John know about the film. Maybe you could just speak to that for a minute or two about the film that you were referring to.
yeah, so it's basically it's a documentary film titled Unfinished, and it was a York master's thesis film directed by my mother, and I was a research associate on it. So a lot of the content overlapped and intersected with a lot of the poetry, and there were a lot of dance videos in it, and uh, there was a lot of docu footage and archival footage of course, like the episodic pieces, and that can be, of course, it can be triggering for some families, but then we need to obviously have those open conversations and make peace with what really took place. And I think that, of course, I put it all behind me. It's back there. But then doing this project together also gave both of us an opportunity to reflect on what took place and possibly why it took place, and also what we can do to prevent it from taking place again.
Yeah, that sounds like a very beneficial outcome for some of the catharsis that was needed. And that film is available. I did watch it. Is it on YouTube? Can't remember.
Yeah, the teaser is there, but we kind of
Okay.
give it out on request. Yeah.
It's good. Yes, because again, observing or participating in other people's lived experience can be so eye-opening and so comforting when you see that someone's gone through something similar and akin to what you've gone through. And I definitely believe in community, recovery support groups, meetings, parent groups. There's so many parent groups out there and caregiver groups out there, and many are online. So they're lowering the barriers to attend in terms of you don't need to drive, you don't need to park. For already stressed and pressured parents and caregivers, you can go online, you can get support. There are Al-Anon family group meetings that are geared towards parents only, or parents specifically. So there are just innumerable supports out there. So again, finding someone who knows what the supports are and to point you in the right direction for the resources that you need is essential. So it sounds like you came up with your ground rules as you were living your life and finding your way. I don't know if you had counseling to kind of come up with those, or if it was all, yeah.
Yes,
all
so
generated from yourself.
my counseling is also one of my ground rules. So what I do is I do counseling regardless of whether I am going through something or the other. So for me, I really, really do believe, especially in mental health and prevention rather than cure. So for me, it's a constant working on myself. And I truly believe everybody has mental health. It's not only the people who have a diagnosis. So, yeah, I mean, I do counseling often, and I think it's important to share, and you could even share with yourself and just like write, like you don't have to like hear back, but it helps to have someone listening and offer advice.
Yes, it sure does. It sure does. I mean, we're hearing now about chat bots and counseling chat bots, but that's a topic for another session. But yes, finding someone to talk to. Professional peer support too is wonderful. Peer mentors and peer support workers. There's certifications around peer support and recovery coaches and recovery companions. It's just there's a dearth of useful tools and resources out there for people.
Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you, Susan, for having me.
Absolutely. It's great to have you.